everybody can do everything right, and it's still not work.
Okay.
And that's the really challenging part of this business. But once you see it work one time, and then a second time, and a third time, it's possible, and you're hooked.
Hey, Dave, welcome to What's Mine is Yours.
Hi, Tiffany. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on this. So, it's really fun. I have like a various different of guests on this show, and sometimes I can find out a lot about them, and sometimes I can't. And you're someone that maybe not as much. You have maybe a few little bios online or things, but which makes, I think, the interview or just the conversation a lot more fun. But what I find interesting about your journey in this industry is that it's kind of gone a different path. You started in law. You then went back to school for audio. Then you were interning. You've done publishing. Now you're at Liz Rose Music. So and I'm sure I know there's a lot of things in between that. But after all of that, what would you say of all the versions of you so far in this industry has shaped you the most of where you are today?
That's interesting. To be honest, the thing that I love most about being a publisher is I get to use all of those different experiences on a daily basis in communicating with songwriters, artists. I have a bunch of producer writers. So my experience at audio engineering school and in doing post-production, when they're stuck on a mix or just need an opinion, I can come in and give them an opinion on that because I've actually done it.
Sure.
I've run live sound for many years for a church just as, on the weekends. And so I know about that when I go see a show and there's something that just isn't translating right. I'll usually have some experience with it and can maybe make a suggestion. Everything, the law touches everything. So having that experience as a paralegal and reading contracts, at the last two companies I've been at, I draft the deal memo. And of course we have an attorney when we're signing a writer. Of course we have an attorney who will sign off on that, but it's, it saves a little bit of time and hopefully a little bit of money to have me just draft it up and then have the attorney sign off on it. So all those things that I've done, they all, I think, make me a better publisher. And that's really where my heart is.
Well, yeah, speaking of that, did you always know that the creative music part of you was going to be the direction versus law when you were in law?
No, I'll tell you, the way that all happened, I grew up in New York, played in bands in high school. We played CBGBs, all these clubs in New York City. And I always loved music. And like a lot of people coming up doing that, you think that you're going to be a rock star someday.
Yeah.
So, and then I moved to Nashville to go to Vanderbilt and, realized, I always had in the back of my mind, well, maybe there's a way for me to work close to music. But I didn't really understand that publishing was a real job at that point. I'm still not sure it's a real job after 20 something years, but because I love it so much still. But I thought, well, at the time, I graduated in 2001, and that's when all the music piracy stuff was going on, Napster, and that was the big controversy. And I thought, well, if I become a copyright attorney, then I can work close to music. That would be a legitimate way for me to work and make a difference in that community. And so right after college, I went to work as a paralegal. I wasn't after, my high school experience in New York City, was a great high school, but a challenging one. And then Vanderbilt, after 8 years, I was like, let me take a breath, make sure this is really what I want to do. So I went to work for a firm here in town as a paralegal, and I'm reading depositions with the heads of publishing companies and artists who are having a catalog dispute or, and I said, what's this job? Like, I want to go do that. How do I get into that? And so, I never forget the day I called my dad and I was like, hey, I'm not going to be an attorney.
Yeah.
And I'm still not sure he understands what I do, but he knows that I love doing it and, and it's worked.
Well, it's interesting that if you weren't in law, you probably would have never discovered something that you actually really wanted to do.
Exactly. It really took me going through that experience to discover that there was a job and there was a way for me to go and do that. So I basically started, like everybody started cold calling, started, trying to figure out how to work my way in the business. And I figured out that I needed to do an internship because that's the interview.
Sure.
in music publishing. And so I just, again, tried cold calling, tried a bunch of different avenues, and most of them were a dead end. So I was like, I have to go back to school and get another degree. And I looked at Belmont and MTSU, great programs, but I didn't want to go get another 4-year degree. So I'd always been interested in audio engineering. And so I was like, well, what if I go to SAE at night and I can get academic credit and do internships in publishing? And so I'm learning about something I'm interested in with the studio stuff, but I'm also able to do internships. And so that's what happened. I did an 18-month program at SAE. And so for that time frame, I was working at the law firm as a paralegal from 7 a.m. to 1, and then I'd take off my tie and my jacket and run over to BMG Publishing for the second half of the day, and then I would go to school at night.
You're a go-getter.
Yeah, but the plan worked. I ended up, ultimately getting a job at BMG from that, and I got to learn about something that I love and something that still serves me well in the studio side of things.
Yeah.
In my current job, but also it was the pathway to getting the internship and getting into publishing.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah.
I will say, I think a common misconception of somebody who's outside of the business, if someone sees a successful executive in music, they think their path was just straightforward. And obviously yours clearly wasn't completely straightforward to where you were going to get to. What would you say is a moment where you felt like Nashville wasn't working for you?
It happened pretty early on.
Okay.
Thankfully. And I went through all of the stuff I just described, and I landed at BMG Publishing, which was, the fourth largest publisher in the world.
Sure.
And I thought, I'm going to take over Nashville, North America. I'll be knocking on Germany's door, at the parent company. And of course, 6 months in, they announced that we were being sold to Universal Publishing. So I was like, oh man, how is this company going to get bigger? Am I going to have a spot? And really a blessing in disguise happened, because the two song pluggers who were there immediately went and found other jobs. And so my boss at the time promoted me, and I said, I don't know if it's going to be 6 weeks or 6 months or years before they get all the antitrust hearings done and merge the companies, but you're the guy. You're the creative guy. So he said, I'll help you. I'll introduce you to people. You keep cold, but you're going to be the song plugger. You're going to be the guy for as long as we have. And so I just, again, got to work and was wearing a lot of hats. But at the end of the day, when the companies finally merged, I got to go over to Universal as a creative person. As a song plugger.
So they ended up
they ended up taking me over there, and I spent 5 years there after that. And when we went over, and I'm not taking credit for this at all, but when we merged, we had, I think, 18 writers and 11 singles on the charts. The baby writers were Luke Laird and Kelly Archer and Justin Weaver and Barry Dean. Those were all
the baby ones.
Rob Hatch, all these writers who went on to be huge songwriters. We had just an amazing crew of songwriters at the time.
Wow.
So I really learned from the best around the best.
And what year what was
that? That was around 2007, I think, when the companies merged, right around then. I could be wrong, but right around then.
In that area.
Yeah. So I saw early on, to answer your question, I saw early on that this is a very volatile business. And you can do everything right and work, really hard, and it's still not work out the way you think it's going to.
Sure.
And that was an eye-opener for me. And of course, I didn't know I had a job at Universal till the week we merged. So I was out there looking for anything to just stay in, but it all worked out in my favor.
It did.
So, but that was a early moment that sort of clued me into how tough this could continue to be.
And because you've actually worn so many hats, and you've talked about how many hats you've worn and what you've done, what would you say out of all of the hats you've worn and the jobs taught you the most about people?
I would say my time at Black River, when I was running the publishing company for a few years there and actually hiring people, and managing people. And I didn't, to be honest with you, I didn't know how hard that would be. I've always feel like I've been a natural leader. Every organization I've been in, I've been the head of it, whether it was my Boy Scout troop or whether it was my fraternity in college, or so I've always been in those positions.
It's a good place
to be in. Yeah, it's great. But it was definitely a learning experience to sort of understand, and I think one of the most important lessons I learned from all that is sometimes, there's a difference between being a good leader, who just kind of goes through the motions, and one who's also a mentor, and it became really important to me to figure out how to be a mentor and to try to pass along some of the knowledge and experience I had to the people who I was working with, who I was hiring, and to really, help them understand why. I was very fortunate to have a bunch of great mentors coming up. Okay. And so, to me, that became a really important part about that leadership role. But it was tough. It was tough to learn how to do that. That's
very true. What would you say is one job that every music executive should have to do before they become one?
I think you should have to be the catalog manager.
Okay.
You should have to be that first sort of like almost creative role. And unfortunately, I think a lot of young people coming into the business skip that role.
Okay.
And I think maybe they're excited to skip that role because it's a lot of grunt work and it's a lot of, but that time sort of figuring out what was important to my boss, to the song pluggers, to saw how all the different pieces fit. You got sort of all the trickle down jobs, but you saw how important they were and how all the pieces fit together. So to me, having that experience starting, at the brand new entry level job and and I'm thankful that I was able to move past that pretty quickly. But I think a lot of people just skip that altogether because the business has shrunk so much. So all of a sudden, your first job, you're in charge of some major calendars and you're expected to go pitch to the heads of A&R and all these things. And, you're scrambling to build your network, really fast. And so I think there are a lot of challenges, to skipping that step.
Well, that's really funny you say that. I absolutely agree with you because I actually compare it a lot to artists today that have to skip a lot of steps, and then they get to the big leagues and they realized, those few steps on the lower part of the ladder were really important.
Yeah.
Because now I'm not prepared to be this A-list artist because I didn't do the beginning things.
Right.
So pretty similar. Did I read correctly? You got here in 1997 for Vanderbilt?
Yes, that's when I started. Yep.
So I always ask every guest, and I feel like it comes up naturally, like, okay, Nashville's changed a lot since you've been here. What's the biggest change you've seen? But I'm kind of change up the question a little bit for you is, what do you think the biggest shift has been since you've been here that you've seen in the Dream Chasers specifically?
That's a really interesting question. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. Okay. So I think when I first ask that question to people, I usually mean like, what's the biggest you've seen in the music industry as a whole? What's the biggest change you've seen? I think I'm more interested now, what is the biggest change you've seen in the people themselves who are chasing the dream? So from 1997 and the early on and say in the 2000s, the artists and the songwriters that were coming up versus the ones today.
Sure. I think more than ever, the burden of proof is on the individual artist, songwriter, creative person. I mean, you really have to be the type of person who, as much as you're loyal to the company you work for and you're trying to build their brand and build their company, you also have to have your own personal reputation, and it's really like you're running, a lot of people say you're the CEO of your own, own company. And I feel like that's really true. And it's more true than ever now. I see, for artists, I mean, the expectation is that those artists are going to go out and rally a team around them and already have some activity going on, whether it's a viral moment or, before there's even a label team involved, and so at every stage, and I feel like there's a trickle down to the publishing side too, it's we have to jump in at a different time than we used to, especially with artist writers, because we can get in too early. And by the time that they build that team out and we help them do that as much as we can, but we're through a 3 or 4 year deal, and then we're negotiating the next one, or things are popping off and we're competing with a whole bunch of other people who are interested now. So that development process has changed a lot. So not to get off on a tangent, but I mean, I feel like every person who's approaching this business from any side really has to have a clear vision of what their goals are in the short term and the long term, and really go out and rally the right team around them and get the right champions.
Well, you're right, because development is just totally not what it was.
Yeah. And I think there's still a passion for development. I mean, I've been meeting with all of the A&R people at all the labels for 20 years, and they all are very passionate about development, but they have new challenges and new things that take up their time. So they're still doing that. But I think that we have amazing A&R people in this town, and they don't get enough credit.
No, because you're not heard of it. You kind of, I think a lot of misconception is that it's just not there anymore. Like A&R isn't a thing anymore, but it's still a thing. It's just not as prevalent.
It's just different.
It's just different.
And they get more involved at a different stage than they used to,
Would you say that artists, I'm going to loop artists and songwriters together because a lot of the time now we have singer-songwriters, but would you say they are hungrier today or less patient?
I would say the right ones are hungrier.
Okay.
The ones that I want to be in business with are hungrier. And that is something that, has become a little bit harder about the publishing job. And we've had to be, a little more careful on sort of really getting to know somebody and making sure we're the right fit at the right time. And there's so many talented people out there. And, we're very fortunate at Liz Rose Music. I mean, the company's been around for 17 years, been really successful. So most songwriters, whether it's their first deal or they're coming out of another deal, they knock on the door and want to meet with us. And that's humbling and it's awesome. But, we can't sign everybody, you know what I mean? And I personally don't have the bandwidth to work with everybody, right? So that I want to all the time. But so we really have to, really get to know them and make sure not only do we think this person is, wildly talented and has what it takes, to deliver the songs for us to pitch or to, to be a great artist, but the timing has to be right to work together. And that to me has become the hardest little piece of it, is figure, is this the right time?
Well, timing is everything, especially in this business, especially if you have someone who is very hardworking. I think that sometimes that's what's so disappointing to a lot of people in this city is like that. As long as you're really hardworking, I feel like there is going to be a time for you, and if you have the talent as well. But a lot of people, that's why I bring up the less patient, because it's unfortunate. I don't mean this in every scenario. That's just my opinion when I see an overall. I think social media and a lot of things has created a less of patience. We were actually just kind of talking about this before we started filming, where I don't think people really know what it feels like to be put on hold or to lose.
Yeah.
And when they feel that, it's very discouraging, I think far faster than it ever used to be. And they're just willing to throw in the towel just far faster. Like, well, if it's no right now, then it's no forever. And I'm just going to move on.
Sure.
So you're right. Timing is very important for people to understand.
Huge. There are a couple other factors. I mean, you didn't ask, but I'll tell you what I look for when I'm trying to sign somebody.
I actually was going to ask you that. I promise you.
It's a little cheesy. And if I might write a book about this some way, so don't steal this idea. But I have these things, it's the 4 T's. Talent, that's the real obvious one, right? And then if you're talented, you have to have tenacity. You have to be, tenacious and just go after it and not take no for an answer. Hustle, grow the network. The next one is you have to be teachable. Okay. And I think that's a really important one that a lot miss. You go to all this trouble to build your career, and you surround yourself with all these great people who have years of experience and knowledge and expertise in a certain field. Listen to them. Learn something. If you think you know everything, pack up and leave. Yep. You're probably not going to last very long. And that goes for everybody. That goes for me, goes for everybody. And then thankful. And I think that's one that a lot of people miss too. You have to have a spirit of gratitude. And particularly I see this with artists, where sometimes there's so many things going on. You have a dozen people putting things on your calendar. There's all these competing interests between your label, your manager, your publisher. Everybody wants you to be doing something different. And you have to remember that it's about the fans. You have to remember that, you have to have this spirit of gratitude and realize that they're what makes it all possible.
Very much.
So those are things that I look for in creatives that I would go after to sign, and so that's kind of served me pretty well. If they check all those boxes, there's a good chance it's going to work.
Those are some pretty good teas.
Yeah.
So, for listeners who don't understand publishing, what does a creative in that role do?
Sure. There are 2 major components to publishing. One is the more glamorous side, which is the creative side. And that's the signing writers, pitching their songs, we keep their calendars, which doesn't sound very exciting, but there's a lot of strategy that goes into that, because it's not an untapped well of creative energy that everybody has. It's, we really want to be very deliberate about who we're setting up collaborations with. Mm-hmm. So I enjoy that part too, because there is a lot of strategy involved. But that's the creative side of things, and that's sort of what most people get into it for.
Sure.
The other side, it doesn't matter how well you do at that if you don't collect the fractions of a penny from all the different sources all over the world, right? So publishers, there's a business side to publishing. And I always say the best publishers are people who are 51% creative and 49% business. Uh-huh. And if you can know how the deals work, if you have a little bit of a legal background, mm-hmm. if you know how the money flows, I think that in the long run, you're going to be a publisher who finds himself in a leadership role or running a company or being able to start a company. But you really need to be left and right brained, I think, to do that job really well.
Okay.
So
now, what would you say for you a day-to-day looks like when you're trying to help a songwriter win?
Sure. I tried to, a long time ago, I started a little checklist. And for every one of the writers at my company, wherever I was, it was, I'm going to try to do one thing today for them, whether that's a big thing, whether it's pitch a song, set up a co-write, whatever, go after, somebody that they want to collaborate with, whatever it is. Try to do one thing, because it really, the way the business moves, it's, we see the overnight success, the quote unquote overnight, but it's usually not that.
Oh, yeah.
It's usually a lot of people working really hard behind the scenes to facilitate that ultimate success. Mm-hmm. And so really, I just think it's every day doing something to try to move the ball forward. And that's really, and I also decided that I wanted to be a song plugger, so I was going to pitch a song every day. And I've pretty much done that most of my career, because there's always somebody looking.
Yeah.
It can be a major label artist here or an independent artist in Australia, wherever. I'm going to pitch a song.
Wow.
And you have to do that, I think, to really do it.
So you would say you do that every day?
Oh yeah, every day. Obviously not on the weekends, hopefully, if I can avoid it. But I'm not, I will if I have to. But I actually find, just as a funny aside, December, usually the music business gets kind of quiet, after the award season and Thanksgiving and that. And I get really itchy in that month and a half period leading up to January, because I don't have an addictive personality, but I love pitching songs. Mm-hmm. So everybody who knows me knows I love doing that, and I'll never stop.
But would you say that there's I know a lot of people like it to be quiet in December, they're like, this is my time to back off. Yeah. But would you say you would find some benefit while everyone's quiet, that you can get something to somebody in a time when...
Maybe. It just depends on the needs and knowing the needs. And that's a big part of the job, too. Uh-huh. It's sort of knowing your audience. And by that, I mean knowing the gatekeepers and what they need. And
don't annoy them.
Some of them, might reach out and say, hey, I know it's December 15th, but this artist is cutting in first week of January. Can you get me something? And of course.
Yeah, of course. Heck yeah, I can.
But typically that month of December is, it's sort of like getting ready for the next year. It's getting all your ducks in a row. Mm-hmm. But I love pitching songs, and that's something I try to do for my writers every day, is just make sure their songs get heard. Because not only are you trying to get an opportunity for them to have a cut on a record, you're also helping them build their brand, because you're showing a gatekeeper, an artist, an A&R person, a producer, hey, this is what this writer did this week. Mm-hmm. How awesome is this? And just over time sort of building up, their brand in the minds of these gatekeepers.
Now, what would you say is your average on a songwriter who, because I know we're kind of, I don't know, maybe we haven't leaned out of this as much as I thought we did, but what would you say the average is on your writers, specifically, let's go with yours, that want to be artists versus just want to be songwriters?
We have 16 writers on our roster right now, and I believe 7 of them are artists.
Okay.
And they all either have or are negotiating a record deal.
Okay.
So yes, we have a lot of artist writers, but I'll tell you, it's very important to us that they are a great songwriter. Mm-hmm. We love artist writers. We love producer writers. And I personally do too. I mean, I love working with artists. I love working with producers. But, I want to know that there's a songwriter who can, get in a room with one or two other people or get in a room by themselves and come out with a song that I can go pitch.
Yes.
And so that's super important to identify, like what their writing process is and what their work product is.
Because I don't want to be like, I always sound so negative when I talk about this, but I haven't sat down with someone like you in a little bit. And I get a little irritated right now because we're in the time or the era of which it feels like every artist has to also be a songwriter. And I think sometimes we're losing the magic of a good song because we're not letting songwriters just write songs.
Sure.
And then have those land in the hands of the people that they're meant to land for. Like,
right.
Because I always compare like a really good artist, if they're not a songwriter, it's kind of like an actor or an actress. It's their job to make it feel like something, like it is theirs, which ultimately then becomes other people's. Like we attach our stories to people's songs.
Sure.
And I'm seeing less and less of like just like a good songwriter being able to be a good songwriter. And now it's like the artists have to do that too.
Yeah. No, I think it is tricky, but I think the process still works.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we get a lot of outside cuts because we pitch songs.
Sure.
And I tell any young writer out there, any writer at all, if you sit down with a company to get a publishing deal and they tell you that it's only calendars and, the song plugging isn't important, I tell them to run the other way.
Okay.
I mean, it's still, the process still works.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I think that you just have to have the relationships, you have to have the drive to go out and get those outside songs cut. Mm-hmm. I do think that in Nashville over the last several years, the unofficial formula has been, let's get the artist writer, the producer writer, and a top liner in the room. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot to like about that. It's an easy path to get a recording at the end of a day.
Doesn't mean you get the best song though.
Right. No, it doesn't. But if you have great people and they keep doing it until you get the best songs, that formula works.
Sure.
I mean, it certainly works, but I think it's a mix. I think it's finding a balance for each writer, each artist writer, each producer of working with other writers that inspire them, or just trying to get them in with the brand new artist that might pop off. Mm-hmm. And all those things are important, and we try to find a balance of all those things.
It's about balance.
So I don't love to put my writers with 5 new people every week. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's okay, well, who do you get the best songs with? Let's make sure you're with one of those people that week, and then let's try something new one day, and let's try, Well,
it's about chemistry too.
Right.
I mean, if it's a relationship, and not everybody's going to be able to come out with great things. I mean, some people just work better with different people, and that's obviously what a part of publishing is being able to set the calendars up with the people that you know that it works with.
That's right. Yeah. And then getting the feedback from those writers afterwards and figuring out what worked, what they're inspired by, and either going and chasing that camp and doing it again and again, or finding new people. Mm-hmm. And I love working with songwriters because none of them are the same. Mm. What works for one doesn't work for the other. So it really is a puzzle, a really fun puzzle to put together with every new writer of like, what do they really do well? What complements them well? And how do I help them? Yeah. You know what I mean? I'm not the writer. Yeah. I can't be in there in the room with them. That's not my area of expertise, but I can help them, hone in on the right people to give them the best chance of getting their songs heard and recorded.
For sure.
So that's the goal every day.
So obviously when it comes to what you do, you've been in numerous like song meetings, right? So, and I know you brought up your 4 T's, but what would you say is something how you can tell that someone has an it factor for you?
Sure. Yeah, I think anymore it's just a gut feeling.
Okay.
I mean, I think you just, when you've been around people long enough, mm-hmm. It's hard to describe. I'm sure you felt it, but like you just know this person's got it. Mm-hmm. This person is a star, mm-hmm. And it's tricky sometimes because there's a lot of really talented people out there, and some of them are super hard workers and they have a great vision, but it's not always those people who end up being the best artists. Absolutely. You know what I mean? And a lot of times people who move here thinking that they're going to be artists end up becoming some of the best songwriters instead. Yeah. And in my mind, they're always an artist, but they've figured out what what the demands of being an artist are, and they've decided that it makes more sense for them and their lifestyle to be a songwriter or to focus on the songwriting.
Well, minus like, so the gut feeling, what would you say some of the signs that you sometimes see that nobody else talks about?
Sure. I think going back to, running it like it's a business and making sure that you have done all the things you possibly can to set yourself up to win.
Okay.
So, I love it when I'm looking at signing a songwriter and maybe they've gone a few years before they got their first publishing deal. They've been out there looking, but they've built up a whole catalog. They turn in a Schedule A, which is all the songs they've written up until the start date. And, there's hundreds of songs there, and they turn in the lyric and all the correct information, the data creation, all the things we need as publishers. And they've made a bunch of relationships on their own. So that, and a lot of times before they've even gotten the first publishing deal, they're working their way into artist camps. And some of these artists, they're the next generation. They go on to be, get the record deal, and, a few of them, get on the charts. And all of a sudden you have this writer who's been plugged in since the beginning. And, so I always encourage young songwriters as they're coming and meeting with me before they have that deal. It's not going to change once you get the deal. Your responsibilities, and the goals are still the same. So go out there, meet artists that you care about, and write a lot of songs with them and build those relationships. So that's one way on the songwriter side. I know when I see writers who do that, who go through that process, I know that they're going to have a really good shot at being winners.
Well, and then actually, like, speaking of that, because you were talking about a little bit, what would you say is the biggest misconception for a songwriter that gets signed to a publishing deal?
I think the idea that the publisher is, I don't know how I want to put this, is just going to sort of magically enhance your career immediately. Yeah, it's a process.
Sure.
And it's figuring out, okay, what's already going on. And how do we, take those next baby steps? Like, how do we get into the rooms that you want to be in? And maybe sometimes it's, okay, well, I know one of the things I do with a writer, the first day I sign them, it's who do you want to write with?
Okay.
And I love it when they get back to me with a list of, the A-list top tier, Grammy winning artist. That's awesome. I want to know that. But I also want to know the brand new writer who just had their first single, who you have done enough research to realize that this person is awesome and I want to write with them. And so I get that list and then I start making moves. And it's like, okay, well, we can get to this dream write, but maybe we're going to introduce you to some other writers that are at the same company as your dream writer. And we're going to strategize a little bit and figure out how to work you organically into those rooms. And the other thing that they need to be doing is they need to be networking on their own. I think, it's not enough to just let your publisher network for you. I think you, as a songwriter, and it's challenging because you go in and you spend all day writing a song, it takes a lot of energy to do that. And sometimes the last thing you want to do is go out to rounds or to go out and, shows and socialize and industry events. But I find that the writers who do that usually excel quicker.
I would say so.
So I mean, I look for that too. I look for them being out and doing. So just never take for granted. Your publisher hopefully is going to try to work as hard as you are, but you always need to be working harder.
Is that yourself. What you would say would be your biggest advice to young writers?
I think, the best advice is to really encourage these young writers to go out there and regardless of whether they have a pub deal, whether they have the relationships they want, whether they have, whatever it is their ultimate goal is, to be moving toward it now. Don't wait. Don't wait for the publishing deal. Don't wait. Go out there, be aggressive, find your champions, and work. Write a lot of songs. Write a song every day, and exercise that muscle. And then when you do get into those rooms that you've been dying to be in, you know what to do with a great idea, and you know who the right people to call on to help you finish it are.
Now, because you've heard so many songs and you've seen songs take shape, sprout wings and fly, and then you've seen some not, Has there been a moment where you've heard something that you undoubtedly knew would be something huge and it just didn't find its home?
All the time.
All the time. How frustrating is that?
It's so frustrating. I mean, everybody can do everything right, and it still not work.
Okay.
You know, and that's the really challenging part of this business. But once you see it work one time, and then a second time, and a third time, you know it's possible, and you're hooked. You know, and so it's really, for a lot of people, it's, you know, sticking around long enough for something good to happen, sticking around long enough for that first win. And, you know, and so I'm always trying to encourage people to do that. But from a song standpoint, there are songs that come in and I'm like, this is a no-brainer. How has this not been cut or not been recorded? And I think I've come to terms with it. I have a sense of peace about it now, because as long as I know that we've been working that song everywhere, sometimes it's just the timing. It's that song has to, you know, find the right artist at the right time. And, you know, a couple of cuts that we've gotten this year, a couple of Liz Rose songs, one was a 10-year-old song, one was a 7-year-old song. And those songs had been pitched a lot.
Yeah.
All that time.
You're absolutely right.
But they finally found the right artist in the right homes, and they both, I think, have single potential with the right artist now.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's exciting to me to see. And that's something you don't always see, you know, if you've been doing it a few years. But once you've been doing it long enough, you can look back and you can say, okay, you know, it might take 5-10 years for this song to find the right home, but it happens. It still happens. So.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a little bit of a controversial question. Why do you think that sometimes the best song doesn't win?
I don't know. I think that it's really hard to place a song. I think it's hard for an artist-writer to write a song that really says what they want to say. And I think it's even harder a lot of times to find a song that somebody else has written that says what you want to say.
That's true. Very true.
You know, so I think the biggest barrier to getting, you know, some of these songs cut, even if they're amazing, is, does the artist really feel genuine saying that? You know, and I love, you kind of touched on it earlier, I don't think every artist has to write songs. You know, in fact, I think a lot of them should probably stay focused on the artistry.
Yeah, some of them
and
might take a seat.
It's not a put down.
No,
it's a, we have the best songwriters in this town. Like, let them write songs.
Let them do it.
You know, and, you know, but I love an artist, or I love when they come in with an idea about what they want to say, their vision, their voice, you know, and that's the most inspiring thing. But I think it's so hard to get songs placed because, you know, an artist is looking for a song that's personal, that's been written by somebody else.
Yeah, that is hard.
You know, and so, you know, even though I hear that and I hear a song and I'm like, this is an amazing song, you know, the right artist to say that might not be around yet. They might not have come along yet. So it's just sort of making sure that we keep it on file and keep pitching it.
Yeah, that's true.
Until the right one comes along.
So you've obviously worked around some of the biggest songwriters, been around, you know, the biggest artists in Nashville. Who would you say is somebody that has exceeded your expectations?
Oh, wow. There are so many that come to mind. I mean, there are so many. Exceeded my expectations. That's a really tough question.
Well, let's just say everybody will exceed your expectations at some point, right? So
hopefully, you know, I don't know that I would single out one particular person. There have been a bunch of writers in my career that, you know, have certainly inspired me.
Okay.
One that I worked with for 10 years at 3 different companies, a guy named David Lee, who wrote Letters from Home and 19-something and I Need You and Lucky Man, some of my favorite personal country songs, you know. But I guess what I wasn't prepared for, he was really the first writer who taught me what the ideal writer-publisher relationship looked like.
Okay.
And I don't know if that's answering your question, but I think it's sort of dancing around it a little bit, hopefully. But with David, I really learned, you know, that the trust that needs to be there in that writer-publisher relationship. I remember as when I first started working with him, you know, he had written a song with one other writer, a hot new up-and-coming writer. And David had been doing it for a while at that point, and I remember going and listening to this song he wrote after it was written, and him saying, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, I think if you change the line in the second verse, somebody was taking off a ring or putting on a ring." Mm-hmm. I said, if you change that so that it's not in the context of a married relationship, I can pitch it to 8 more artists." And he said, "Oh, okay." And 10 minutes later, there was a brand new line that was just as good. But he trusted me, to sort of speak up and say, here's what I need in order to go sell this. This is my area of expertise, is going, into these pitch meetings and selling the song. And I try to make all my feedback with writers about that. I know they can all write great songs.
Yeah.
I don't look at it as my job to tell them whether their song is good or bad.
No, but sometimes you have to be on the outside of it
Yeah.
and give, your advice from someone who wasn't in the room and if someone who isn't as close to it, and like you're not in there with them.
Right.
And so if you're outside of it, you can see it from a different perspective.
Exactly. And that's been my experience with so many of the songwriters that I work with. It's, as you get into it and you get to know them and you build that relationship and you build that trust, you can accomplish so many more things, and I've seen that with the brand new writer that I signed to Liz Rose. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just so thankful Liz trusts me. Mm-hmm. She might not always see it the way I see it right away, but I'm like, hey, I really think you should write with this artist. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And there's not a lot going on yet, but I think you should do this and get in early. And I just am so appreciative of having the trust of a Hall of Fame writer, or any writer, to be able to say, okay, I trust you. Yeah. I trust your ears. I'll take a shot.
Well, speaking of Liz Rose and the fact that you work at Liz Rose Music,
sure.
What would you say? Obviously, we have to speak about Liz a little bit.
Sure.
And so now that you were a perfect segue into that, is what do you think makes Liz one of the most respected songwriters in Nashville?
I don't know how many people know this, but Liz was a publisher before she was a songwriter.
Wow.
So she didn't start writing songs, I think, until she was 40 years old.
Wow.
And so she understands what I do every day. It's wonderful to have a boss who has been a publisher and has pitched songs and who has done all those things before she went on to become a huge songwriter. So that in and of itself, is awesome.
Yeah.
To be able to have somebody who comes from a publishing background and knows the challenges of that. And I think that's what makes the company so great.
Sure.
And why it's been around for so long. But what else do you want to know about Liz?
Well, and another thing that, and this is not an unfortunate thing, it's a very fortunate thing, but I'd be remiss if I didn't, obviously bring it up, that Liz, I think, is now forever kind of, especially people who are not in the industry, her name is forever tied to dun 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 Taylor Swift,
sure.
Right? And especially in the early days of Taylor's career. What do you think made those songs in the beginning so special?
I think Liz doesn't necessarily have a sound of her own. And that's a positive thing. She gets into the room, and she can do it with any artist in any genre. She gets into the room and she starts a conversation, much like you and I are having. Mm-hmm. There's no computer. She has a notepad.
Sure.
But, there's a conversation, and she spends maybe half an hour getting to know that artist and what they're into, or a songwriter, what they're interested in, and she's just taking some notes here and there. And then all of a sudden, about 45 minutes in, you've got the bones of a song.
Wow.
And Liz is quick. It's rare that, we joke that if it's more than 3 hours, if we don't hear from her, she's probably writing 2 songs with the artist. So, she's just that good at helping people tell the honest truth in a song, and without having to put her own style or vibe or anything else. And I think that, if she were here, she would say, what I did with Taylor is I saw somebody who was wildly talented, had ideas, had a vision, and I helped them, work that out. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I helped them. And I think that, she's always very humble about it, but I think that, she's impacted so many artists and continues to. Mm-hmm. She's inspired by young artists who have a great sense of self and want to come into the room and tell the truth in a song. And I think that's where she really shines.
Well, another thing that I think, obviously, Taylor, I'm sure, was already good at, but what it seems Liz, especially when I'm focusing on the early days in those specific songs, that Liz must be really good at, is something special about capturing a specific moment.
Sure.
Because that's what I think some songs have lost today, is that the storytelling of the music doesn't feel like a specific moment. It feels far more broader. And I understand why that is beneficial. It can be then given to anybody. It's very hard to pitch a song to somebody that it's about a specific moment in time, because you didn't live that specific moment.
Sure.
But I will say there is something special about those songs that Liz did with Taylor, because they were so specific, and in a way you almost think, how can they work with the masses? But somehow they did, because they felt so real and honest, and we were like living in a moment with Taylor, and Liz helped shape those moments. And I always go back to the All Too Well song in general, because it is so specific and so detailed that you go, how could this ever work? And just somehow it did, and it was massive. So what do you think is something that is special about capturing specific moments in songs versus it being so broad?
I think it's really writers getting in the room together and daring to, it's a lack of a better word, daring to suck is how I've heard one writer say that. I asked another writer that I went early on in my career, I'm like, why do you write with this group of people every week? Once a week, religiously. And they were like, because I can dare to suck. And what he meant by that was, I can throw out whatever's on my mind, and I know these people so well, and they know me, that they can say, that sucks, but that gives us this idea. Yeah. And then they're off to the races.
The springboard.
It's, you're very vulnerable in that room. And I think Liz does a great job of, of sort of like being a great mentor and a great in a songwriting room, and being somebody who artists are comfortable, being vulnerable with, as I said, because she's not trying to force them to do anything because she likes it. She's really trying to hear them and, and help them make their idea and their vision better. That's really her goal. Yeah. And I think that most writers who do that, end up having really successful careers. I think that there's just a lot of people who like, I have this sound, I'm known for this sound or this particular thing, and I'm going to do that in every write with every artist. And sometimes that works, but I think a lot of times it's really coming around to, it's putting your ego aside and coming around to the artist in the room and what's best for them.
Well, and there's some magic there to knowing that that's how good of a writer she is that she can adapt her style in whatever room she is, versus the people, not taking away from the people who have a style and that's what they're good at, because we've seen that create a lot of success.
Sure.
But for someone to be able to go into a room with almost anyone and be able to adapt onto what they are, like feed off of them, that's something that I don't think you see a ton of.
No, it's really a special gift. It really is. And as publishers and creatives in the business, we're all looking for those people all the time. We're trying to identify those people who just, are great, but then have that extra skill set.
Sure.
That extra appeal, that extra, ability to make other writers, other creatives comfortable. I mean, that's the goal. Those are the people I'm trying to find. And to be honest with you, people with anymore, if somebody doesn't have a positive attitude, we all get down. There are a lot of challenges. There are going to be times where a song comes off hold, or it goes to number 2, or there is a lot of disappointment in this business. But I try to surround myself with people who have a positive attitude. And no matter what the challenges are, they're going to come into that songwriter room fresh and ready to, write a great song. And to meet the other writers in the room wherever they are in their journeys. And I think that that's a rare skill to find in a person, and especially in a songwriter.
Yeah. Well, speaking about disappointment, a little bit shifting, it's not in the same vein, but a little bit, is What would you say is the loneliest part of success in Nashville?
I think that I think there's so many ways to answer that depending on, what side of it you're looking at. I mean, I've watched a lot of young, particularly let's talk about artist writers.
Sure.
I think a lot of them, there's nothing that prepares you to be famous. Even if you think that you are, all of a sudden, everybody wants a part of you. Everybody wants to meet you. Everybody wants to be around you, and that's something that it really you can lose yourself really easily in that. But you can also lose sight of who's got your back,
Sure. Who's
in your corner, who's just telling you yes because they can make a buck. And who's really, a champion, a true champion. So, I think that if I have another book idea, don't steal this, but it's Cheerleaders and Champions, about this business. And I feel like, everybody loves a cheerleader. Those are the people who are there, rooting for you when everything's going right.
But what you really need
but you also need a champion. You need people who are, going to be behind the scenes facilitators in the trenches, doing those little moves every day that are really going to propel things forward. And that, to get back to your question, that you can go to and trust to give you an honest answer, regardless of how famous you become.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one thing that, I have the utmost respect for creative people, songwriters, artists, what they do. And I've gotten to work with some really big ones, but I'm always the same with them. And I tell them that from the start. You know what I mean? Like, we're always going to have the same relationship. You're going to be, and I'm going to tell you exactly what I think,
yeah.
When you come to me.
Have you ever watched success cost people relationships?
Sure. I think that happens all the time. I think that there's, and I don't really fault people for this, but I think, if you have success really quickly with a group of people that you come up with, all of a sudden you have the opportunity to write with all the top people and to work with the top producers and to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like this grass is greener mentality. And I think a lot of people can't help but go explore that. I love to see them do that and then come back around to the original. And that happens too, because sometimes it's like, if it's not broken, let's keep those people who you came up with, in the mix, add new people, grow, but let's keep some of those. And that's a mistake I see a lot of young artists, they get somewhere with a certain group of writers, they get somewhere with a brand new producer, and then the minute there's an opportunity to go find the big name, they go do that, and again, usually to the detriment of the project. So, I try to share that experience with artists too, that just because I've seen it happen, and then I've seen other situations where the same group of people have built a whole career together and been together forever, and that's inspiring too. Liz and the Love Junkies, Laurie and Hillary, they still, every month, is as crazy as all their schedules are. Every month they get together for a few consecutive days and write songs by themselves, with an artist, with another writer. It's sacred. When I worked with David Lee, who I talked about, he and Tony Lane wrote for 20 years every Tuesday. It was Tony Tuesday on his calendar, and they never missed.
Wow.
They might add an artist or another writer in, but, and I love it when writers find those sort of writing soulmates. But I think there are a lot of things stacked against a new writer or artist finding those people and holding on to them. I think the culture is, constantly improve, and it constantly write up. There's this term, write up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I get that. You know what I mean? But there's something to be said for the people who you had your first number one with.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And so
that's a bond. That's something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's important. And those people are willing to grow with you. So grow with them.
So speaking of writers that maybe aren't ready yet, and you're having to tell them that, which I'm sure is probably sometimes a difficult conversation. How do you balance honesty and hope?
Sure. Yeah. No, that's definitely a challenge every day, because it is. It's just so hard. But it really is, on the front end, it's identifying people who have that positive attitude and that tenacity. You know what I mean? Like, and so I think you eliminate a lot of the need to do that if you find those people on the front end. You get to know them, you know, for a while before you do that deal.
Yeah.
And you just kind of figure out what their work ethic is, what their, just how they work, you know, and their personality. So I think a lot of it is that. But, you know, it's for me personally, I've been doing this for over 20 years and I've seen so many things and I'm not always right, but I've had a lot of experience on, you know, seeing what things have worked and what hasn't. So I try to approach it of let's set ourselves up based on everybody's sort of collected experience. Let's set ourselves up to win. Let's check all these boxes, do these things that we think will help us, you know, win, and do those, have all the ducks in a row. And then when that opportunity that we're not expecting comes up, we're ready for it. We're ready to capitalize on it.
Sure.
You know, so it really is just this having an open dialogue with them on what are we doing every day to set you up to win. And I think that's really the best you can do.
True.
You know?
Yeah.
And then you're waiting for that you know, that moment, usually unexpected, to happen. That viral moment or that, you know, that thing to catch fire that you didn't expect to catch fire.
Yeah. Now, speaking of maybe some of that, a viral moment and the success, what do you think is the biggest lie people believe about success?
The biggest lie that people believe about success. I think that you're going to be satisfied. You know, sure. I think you think, you know, you hit this goal, but there's always another goal.
Sure.
You know, and that can, you know, I think it's important to have people around you who keep you grounded, you know, and tell you the truth so that, you know, when you're disappointed because you hit that mark and it's still not satisfying and there's a new mark.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Is
Very much.
Having people who sort of are right there with you. And again, I look at that job, you know, I always tell people, I joke with people that, you know, music publishing, being a publisher, it's not a glory job. We're facilitators. We're behind the scenes people. You know, it's rare that, and it's not because they don't care about us, but it's rare that you see a publisher thanked on the Grammys.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's just not the role. You know, we're the people who are sort of there, you know, for, you know, on a day-to-day basis to come and strategize, plan, commiserate with, you know, and I'm okay with that role. I love songwriters and I love songs. I don't need any glory or recognition. I get my joy out of getting to interact with them and hear new songs every day that nobody else has ever heard.
That's actually really cool.
You know, so that's the part of it that I love, you know. But I think, you know, whatever side of this you pick, you have to be prepared to find joy in that particular part of it. You know, the rest is out of your control. And I'll tell songwriters that a lot. You've done everything you could here. You know, you wrote a great song, we packaged it properly in the right demo, you know, we've gone and pitched it, we've done all the right things, you know, or it becomes, the stars line up and it becomes a single, but it's out of our control now.
Then it really is. Then it's like, I mean, I think there's only so much money that goes into the promotion, which is fine. And sometimes a really great song just doesn't have the adequate promotion.
That's
and
right.
It's hard for people to know about something if they never heard of it.
Yeah.
And then there's a point where they did all the adequate promotion and then it's left to the public. And if it's not connecting, then it doesn't connect. And sometimes great things might just not connect. And you just don't, there's just really never a one direct answer of it all. And like music is just so subjective in for everybody. A song, the melody, the lyric, anything. So it just kind of depends. You can only do so much and then you got to let it
That's right.
find its wings on its own.
And keep creating. And move on to the next thing.
Yes.
You know, and that's another thing. I never want to see, you know, a writer. I've worked with a few writers who feel like they've written their biggest song. And it might be a huge song, but they feel like they get paralyzed by that because they feel like they can never hit that level of success again. You know, and that's got to be a hard thing that I've seen a few times and I never want to see that.
Yeah.
I always want, you know, writers to feel like, you know, today I could write my best song.
Yeah.
You know, that has to be the attitude.
Absolutely.
You know, and for publishers, for anybody, it's like, today I could win. You know, and I think if you don't have that attitude, you probably shouldn't be in this.
In this.
You know, you should find something different. You know?
Go to the DMV. So before we get out of here, I want to do a little rapid fire with you, if you don't mind. I don't know how rapid it will be. Obviously, everyone always says to me that they can't come up with an answer fast enough, but we have a little bit of time.
Okay.
So I know that let's say not one of your songwriters, to take this off the table of everyone feeling bad if you say a name that isn't on your team. We're going to exit out the Liz Rose people.
Okay.
Best songwriter you've ever sat in a room with?
Oh my gosh. That's so hard.
Is it your David Lee?
David Lee is definitely one who personally, you know what I mean, has been just, an example of, a successful career and somebody who is just a songwriter.
Okay.
I got to see him get inducted into the He's from Texas Songwriter Hall of Fame a couple of years. And I guess from how proud I was to be associated with a songwriter, that was a moment for sure.
Okay.
But obviously, Liz is amazing. But, during my time at Universal, part of my responsibility was reaching out to the catalog writers. In other words, and we had catalog going back to the 1930s, and a third of the Hall of Fame writers' catalogs. To the extent that those people were still in Nashville or around or alive and willing to talk to me, I would be reaching out and trying to pitch some of their songs.
Whoa.
So I met Bob McDill and Alan Reynolds and like all these just incredible, Hugh Presswood, who passed away recently, a brilliant songwriter. Hugh was a writer at BMG when I started, and he lived on Long Island, where I'm from. And so we just bonded immediately. And for years after, wherever I was, he would come to my office whenever he came to Nashville and sit and play me whatever new songs he was working on. And there are just so many great memories. There's so many just wildly talented songwriters that I've gotten to work with and be around at every level. I couldn't narrow it down to one.
Well,
there's no way. Sorry if that's a cop-out.
No, you're fine. we still named some.
Sure.
Most underrated songwriter in Nashville right now?
Most underrated. Wow. I feel like that's a really loaded question.
Is it?
Because
How about someone who doesn't have a publishing deal? Someone that you hope you see get one.
Okay. Man. I hope they all get them. I do this since it started. I do the ASCAP GPS program, and they pick where they sort of act as a filter and pick a dozen songwriters every year. And they come around to a bunch of the publishers and meet with them. And most of them don't have. Every one of them should have a publishing deal. They do a great job at picking people. But there are so many of them. Tiffany, I don't know.
Giving me such political answers.
I couldn't say that.
It's fine. It's fine.
I will tell you. I'll tell you about one of ours that I was shocked that we got her in her first publishing deal. Lauren McLam.
Okay.
She a brilliant songwriter, top liner. I think that she is on track to be a Liz Rose or a Lori McKenna, or she's just a brilliant songwriter. And when we started talking to her, I would just see her name start showing up on songs with 3 or 4 other writers in the building. And I was like, who is this person? These songs are awesome. And all the writers would be like, oh yeah, that's Lauren. Put her in any room.
Wow.
Anytime. And I'm like, okay. And then the next question is, well, where does she write? And they're like, oh, well, she doesn't have a deal yet. So our whole team starts meeting with Lauren. We start putting, I don't know how long since she was out of Belmont, but she's one who I was talking about earlier who, we got the Schedule A of 700 and something songs, and they were all organized by year with the lyric and the date of creation and every bit of information. And she was writing with 50, she already had 30 cuts on her own. She was writing with a bunch of artists who went on to get record deals. And, she's an example of a songwriter signing to their first deal that I would want to clone over and over again if I had that power, And so, I think, again, it's just timing. I'm so glad that our team was able to sign her and she's getting cuts all over the place now, and just, there are so many out there.
Sure.
But so it's a roundabout answer to your question. But she's one who, if it were, 5 years ago, I would have said Lauren.
Yeah. Lastly, Dave, before you go, when this is all over and your career is over, what would you like people to look back at and say what your impact on Nashville was?
I would love for songwriters to look back and say, that guy helped me. He listened to me. He trusted me. I trusted him. And, we had success together. We were able to get some great songs across the line. And, I think that's the biggest compliment ever. I think, for all of the successes that I've gotten to be a part of, the cuts, the thing, all of that, the thing that I've been most proud of is when a writer, I maybe moved to a different company and a writer followed me. And that's happened several times in my career, or wanted to follow me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And to me, that's the greatest success that you could hope for in dealing with songwriters, is having them want to, come and work with you again, And so to me, it's knowing that at some point, they are thankful and I made a difference in moving their career forward.
Absolutely.
And thankfully already there have been several that have conveyed that to me, and that means everything.
For sure. That's a huge testament to what.
Totally.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dave, so much
Thank
for being
you.
on the show.
Yeah,
I appreciate
of course.
it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. Yeah.